I'm Lucy, and I met Tom when I was 30 years old. Tom worked in the IT department of Global Tech, a major multinational corporation where I translated. Noticing that he was always prepared with a joke or a helpful hand when my computer decided to have a meltdown, our coffee dates quickly evolved into dinner dates. Before long, our bond became unbreakable. Tom proposed to me in the middle of our beloved park a year later. Champagne toasts and white lace made for a hectic wedding. Margaret and Robert, Tom's parents, appeared like decent people. With a firm hug, Margaret said, "Welcome to the family, dear." If only I had understood then the true meaning of that greeting. Following our honeymoon, we relocated to Tom's flat. It had an amazing view of the city skyline and was modern and large. "It's ideal," I exclaimed, spinning around the living room. "Wait till you see the kitchen," Tom smiled. Mom insisted on purchasing only the best items. I should have listened more intently to those remarks and questioned more when I first moved in. But I was too excited to begin our life together. The initial weeks were pure delight. Tom and I settled into a relaxed routine, splitting household duties and spending peaceful nights together. Then that occurred one Saturday morning. I heard the front door open while I was trying to make pancakes in the kitchen. "Hope you're hungry, babe," I said, assuming Tom had returned from his morning run. However, Tom wasn't the one who entered the kitchen. Margaret was the one. She looked around at the mess I'd made and said, "Oh, hello, dear. I thought I'd pop in and see how you two are settling in." With a spatula in hand, I stood there utterly startled. "Margaret, how did you—" She held out a key for me to see. Sure, I have an extra. How else could I make sure Tommy is doing?" Margaret rushed by me, opening cabinets and taking a quick look inside the refrigerator. She got out cleaning materials and began wiping down the already immaculate counters, which I watched in awe. "However, we are now married. You're not required to—" "Illogical," she cut in. "I still love Tommy, and I have a lot of free time these days." I'm glad to assist. I had to listen to a constant critique of my cleaning abilities, or lack thereof, for the next hour. Margaret said I was about to scream by the time Tom came back. With a tone of surprise in his voice, Tom asked, "Mom, what are you doing here?" Margaret smiled down at him. "I'm only trying to help Lucy organize things, sweetie. You are aware of the difficulties a new wife may face." I bit my tongue so hard that blood was detected. Tom gave me a pitying glance, but remained silent to refute his mother. The next few weeks were a blur of unexpected visits and unsolicited advice. Margaret seemed to materialize in our apartment at the most inconvenient times, always armed with a critique and a story about her own domestic prowess. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry, she burst in without warning. "Oh, Lucy," she said, eyeing my neat piles of clothes, "that's not how you fold t-shirts. Here, let me show you." I gritted my teeth. "Margaret, I appreciate your help, but—" "Nonsense," she interrupted, already refolding a stack of Tom's shirts. "I've been doing this for years. Did I ever tell you about my own mother-in-law? Now she was a piece of work." And so began another session of Margaret's favorite pastime, regaling me with tales of her own suffering at the hands of her mother-in-law. She used to come over unannounced, Margaret said, oblivious to the irony, always criticizing my cooking, my cleaning. Nothing was ever good enough for her. I bit back the urge to point out the similarities. Instead, I forced a smile. "That must have been difficult." "Oh, it was," Margaret nodded sagely. "But I endured it, and look how well Tommy turned out. You should be grateful I'm nothing like her." Grateful? Right. Because having my privacy invaded and my abilities constantly questioned was such a blessing. As the days wore on, my patience wore thin. Margaret's visits became more frequent, her criticism more pointed. She'd run her finger along the top of the fridge, looking at imaginary dust. She'd reorganized the pantry, claiming she knew best how Tommy liked things. Tom, for his part, seemed oblivious to the tension. "Mom's just trying to help," he'd say whenever I brought it up. "She means well." But good intentions or not, I was at my breaking point. The constant intrusion, the endless criticism, the thinly veiled insults. It was all becoming too much. It came to a head one Sunday afternoon. I was in the middle of preparing dinner when Margaret waltzed in, key in hand. "Lucy, dear," she called out, her voice sickeningly sweet. "I thought I'd drop by and give you some pointers on proper meal planning. Tommy's always been particular about his Sunday roasts." I stood there, wooden spoon in hand, feeling something inside me snap. This was my home, my kitchen, my marriage, and I'd had enough. Taking a deep breath, I turned to face her. "Margaret," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "we need to talk." Her eyebrows shot up in surprise. "About what, dear?" "About boundaries," I replied. "About privacy. I appreciate your intention to help, but coming over unannounced and criticizing everything I do, it's not helping. It's making me feel uncomfortable in my own home." She left without another word, the door slamming behind her. As the sound echoed through the apartment, I leaned against the counter, exhausted but oddly exhilarated. That evening, as Tom and I sat down for dinner, I knew I had to approach the subject. "Tom," I started, pushing my food around on my plate, "we need to talk about your mother." He sighed, putting down his fork. "What's she done now?" I took a deep breath and recounted the day's events, along with all the other incidents that had been building up. As I spoke, I could see the conflict in Tom's eyes, torn between his love for his mother and his commitment to me. "Lucy, I know Mom can be intense," he said carefully, "but she means well. She's just trying to help." I shook my head. "Tom, I understand that, but this isn't help. It's control. She comes into our home uninvited, criticizes everything I do, and makes me feel like an intruder in my own life. It has to stop." Tom ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. "What do you want me to do?" "I need you to set boundaries with her," I said firmly. "Take back her key, ask her to call before coming over, and most importantly, I need you to stand up for me when she oversteps." There was a long pause as Tom processed my words. Finally, he nodded. "You're right. I'll talk to her." True to his word, Tom had a conversation with Margaret the next day. I wasn't present for it, but from what Tom told me, it didn't go well. Margaret was hurt and offended, claiming we were pushing her out of our lives. But in the end, she reluctantly agreed to our terms. For a while, things seemed to improve. Margaret's visits became less frequent and were always preceded by a phone call. But the peace was short-lived. It started with little things. Suddenly, I found myself uninvited to Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. When I asked Tom about it, he'd shrug uncomfortably. "Mom says it's just immediate family this time," he'd say, not meeting my eyes. The final straw came on Tom's father, Robert's birthday. Tom and I had planned to go together to wish him well, but at the last minute, Tom got called away on an urgent work matter. "You should still go," Tom insisted. "Dad would want to see you." Hesitantly, I agreed. I rang the doorbell, gift in hand, and waited. When Margaret opened the door, her eyes narrowed. "Lucy," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you. This is a family gathering. And let's be honest, dear, you're not really family, are you?" Her words hit me like a slap. I stood there, stunned, as she continued. "You've made it quite clear that you don't want me in your life, so I think it's best if you leave now. We wouldn't want any uninvited guests ruining Robert's special day." As if on cue, Robert appeared behind her. "What's going on?" he asked, looking between us. Margaret's demeanor changed instantly. "Oh, Robert," she said, her voice trembling theatrically. "Lucy here was just leaving. Isn't it awful how she's pushed me out of Tommy's life, taken away my keys, forbidden me from visiting my own son?" I felt my face burning with anger and humiliation. "That's not true," I protested. "I only asked for some boundaries." "Enough," Robert said firmly, surprising us both. He turned to Margaret, his expression stern. "That's enough, Margaret. Lucy is family, and she's welcome here." He then looked at me, his eyes softening. "Please come in, Lucy. We'd love to have you join us." Shocked and grateful, I stepped inside. Margaret, clearly furious, stormed off to the kitchen. As I followed Robert into the living room, I could feel the eyes of the other guests on me, curious about the scene they had just witnessed. The next few years were a constant battle with Margaret. Despite our efforts to set boundaries, she always found ways to insert herself into our lives. Then tragedy struck. Robert fell ill suddenly, his condition deteriorating rapidly. When he passed away, it felt like the world had shifted on its axis. The funeral was a somber affair, with Margaret stoically going through the motions, barely acknowledging my presence. After the service, Robert's lawyer, Mr. Thompson, a kindly man who had been his close friend, approached us. "Mrs. Walker, if you and your son could join me in private, Mr. Walker left some specific instructions regarding his will." When they emerged, the atmosphere had changed drastically. Margaret looked pale and shocked, while Tom seemed confused and conflicted. As we drove home, Tom finally broke the silence. "Dad left everything to me," he said quietly. "The house, the savings, everything, even Mom's house." I was stunned. "What? But why?" Tom shook his head. "I don't know. The lawyer didn't explain." At that moment, I remembered Margaret's reaction. Her face had been a mix of disbelief and anger. I could have sworn I heard her mutter under her breath, "That fool," before composing herself. The next day, Margaret called Tom, her voice trembling. "Tommy, you're not going to kick me out, are you? This house, it's all I have left of your father." Tom's response was immediate. "Of course not, Mom. The house is yours to live in, and I'll set up a monthly allowance for you." I didn't object. If it was Tom's inheritance, his money, his decision, and despite our differences, I couldn't imagine leaving Margaret homeless after losing her husband. However, our act of kindness did little to soften Margaret's attitude towards me. She stopped coming to our house, but her influence was still felt. She called Tom constantly, always with some emergency or excuse for why he needed to come over. "Tommy, the sink is leaking. I think I heard a strange noise in the attic. I'm not feeling well. Could you stay the night just in case?" Tom, ever the dutiful son, would rush to her aid, often staying overnight. It was driving me crazy. As Margaret's birthday approached, I braced myself for another round of exclusion. For the past 2 years, I'd been pointedly uninvited from family gatherings, relegated to the role of outsider in my own marriage. So, when Tom announced he had to leave on a last-minute business trip, I resigned myself to a quiet evening alone. I was surprised then when my phone rang the day before Margaret's birthday. Even more surprising was the name on the caller ID. "Lucy, dear." Margaret's voice oozed sweetness through the speaker. "I'm calling about my birthday celebration tomorrow. I know we've had our differences, but I'm tired of all this hostility. I'd like us to reconcile." I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, utterly dumbfounded. "You want me to come to your birthday party?" "Of course, dear. I know Tommy can't make it, but I'd love to see you there. What do you say?" Part of me wanted to refuse outright. After years of snubs and barely veiled insults, why should I believe this sudden change of heart? But Margaret's voice sounded so sincere, so genuinely warm, that I found myself wavering. I suppose I could stop by, I heard myself say. Wonderful, Margaret exclaimed. It's at the Willow Creek Country Club. I'll see you at 7. The next evening I found myself driving to the country club, a carefully chosen gift, and a bouquet of flowers on the passenger seat beside me. As I approached the entrance, a sense of unease settled in my stomach. I pulled up to the security barrier where a guard stepped out of his booth. "Please, Lucy Walker," I replied, trying to sound confident. The guard scanned his list and then frowned. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't see that name here. There must be some mistake," I said. My hands growing Margaret Walker invited me personally. "I'm her daughter-in-law." The guard shook his head. "I'm sorry, but if you're not on the list, I can't let you in. It's a private event." Flustered, I got out of the car and pulled out my phone to call Margaret. After a few rings, she picked up. "Margaret, it's Lucy. I'm at the entrance, but they won't let me in." A few minutes later, I saw Margaret approaching the barrier, surrounded by a group of well-dressed guests. They were all laughing, glasses in hand, clearly enjoying the party that was already in full swing. As Margaret neared my car, I expected her to clear up the misunderstanding with the guard. Instead, she fixed me with a cold stare that sent chills down my spine. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "If it isn't the little gold digger herself. Did you really think I'd let trash like you into my birthday celebration?" I stood there stunned as Margaret continued her tirade. "I specifically chose this venue to keep out unwanted elements like you. Why are you even here? You're not family. You're nothing but a money-hungry who trapped my son." The guests behind her tittered, clearly enjoying the show. I felt my face burning with humiliation and anger. "But you invited me," I stammered. "You said you wanted to reconcile." Margaret's laugh was cold and cruel. "Oh, you poor naive girl. I wanted to see just how desperate you were to get your hands on our family's money. And look at you, showing up like a stray dog begging for scraps."
For a moment, I stood face to face with Margaret, seeing the malice gleaming in her eyes. Then, with deliberate slowness, I dropped the flowers and gift at her feet. Without another word, I got back in my car and drove away. Margaret's mocking laughter and the sounds of the party faded behind me. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling from Margaret's cruel words and actions. As soon as I walked through the door, I collapsed onto the couch and called Tom, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. Through tears and hiccups, I recounted the entire humiliating ordeal. Tom listened in stunned silence, only interrupting occasionally to ask for clarification. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then Tom's voice came through, low and angry. "I'm coming home, and then I'm going to have a very serious conversation with my mother." True to his word, Tom was on the next flight home. When he arrived, he held me close, apologizing over and over for his mother's behavior. Then, with a determined look in his eye, he picked up the phone and called Margaret. I could hear Margaret's voice, shrill and defensive, through the speaker, but Tom's responses were calm and resolute. "No, Mom, this time you've gone too far. I don't want to hear your excuses. You humiliated my wife, the woman I love. No, I'm done. I'm cutting you off. No more allowance, no more help. You're on your own." For a week, we enjoyed a peace we hadn't known in years. No frantic calls from Margaret. No emergencies requiring Tom's immediate attention. It felt like we could finally breathe. But of course, it couldn't last. One afternoon, there was a knock at our door. When I opened it, I found Margaret standing there, her eyes red and puffy, her appearance disheveled. "How could you do this to me?" she wailed, pushing past me into the house. "I raised that boy. I devoted my entire life to him, and now, because of you, he's left me with nothing. No money, no support. I can barely afford to eat. She paced the living room, her voice rising hysterically. "It's all your fault. You turned him against me. You're the reason Robert disinherited me. You've ruined everything." I tried to interject to defend myself, but Margaret was beyond reason. She continued her rant, tears streaming down her face, until she finally collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. After a few minutes, Margaret composed herself and left without another word, leaving me standing in the middle of the living room, confused and conflicted. As the door closed behind her, I made a decision. I needed answers, and I knew just who might have them. The next day, I found myself sitting across from Rob's lawyer in his office. The room was warm and inviting, with shelves lined with law books and framed diplomas on the walls. Mr. Thompson looked at me with kind eyes, his hands folded on the desk between us. "Mrs. Walker," he began, "I understand you have some questions about your father-in-law's will." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yes, I do. I need to understand why Robert left everything to Tom and nothing to Margaret. It just doesn't make sense." Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair, a conflicted look crossing his face. He seemed to be weighing his words carefully. "Mrs. Walker, I've known the family for a long time, and what I'm about to tell you, well, it's not pleasant. The truth is, Margaret had been unfaithful to Robert." I felt my jaw drop. "What?" "She had a lover." Mr. Thompson continued, "A man who passed away shortly before Robert's death. This man left Margaret a significant amount of property in his will." I sat there stunned as Mr. Thompson went on. "Robert found out about the affair and the inheritance. They had a terrible argument, and that's when he decided to change his will, leaving everything to Tom." My mind was reeling. Margaret, who had always portrayed herself as the devoted wife and mother, had been living a double life. But Mr. Thompson wasn't finished. "There's more," he said, his voice somber. "Years ago, when Tom was just a boy, Robert's mother, Tom's grandmother, fell ill. She had saved money for years to afford a place in a private nursing home where she hoped to spend her final days in comfort. I listened, a sense of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. Margaret convinced Robert to sell his mother's property and sent her to a state-run facility instead. They kept the money for themselves and rarely visited the poor woman. She passed away not long after, alone and neglected. I felt sick. The Margaret I knew was manipulative and cruel, but this was a level of callousness I couldn't have imagined. "Robert carried that guilt with him for years," Mr. Thompson said softly. "I think changing his will was his way of trying to make things right, to ensure that Margaret couldn't do to Tom what she had done to his mother." As I left Mr. Thompson's office, my head was spinning. The woman who had accused me of being a gold digger had been the real predator all along, pursuing her own interests at the expense of her family's well-being and happiness. That evening, when Tom came home from work, I sat him down and recounted everything I had learned from Mr. Thompson. Tom listened in stunned silence, his face a mix of disbelief, anger, and profound sadness. "I can't believe it," he said when I finished, his voice barely above a whisper. "All these years, she's been lying to us, manipulating us." We stayed up late into the night, talking through the implications of these revelations. Tom was devastated, but also resolute. "This ends now," he said firmly. We didn't have to wait long for Margaret to make her next move. A few days later, she showed up at our door, all tears and pleas for help. "Tommy," she began, her voice quavering, "I know you're angry, but please, I need your help. I have nothing left." Tom's face was like stone as he replied, "That's not true, is it, Mom? We know about your lover, about the apartment and money he left you. Margaret's face drained of color. What? What are you talking about? Drop the act, Tom said, his voice cold. We know everything about your affair, about what you did to Grandma. All of it. Margaret's demeanor changed instantly. Gone was the pitiful, pleading woman. In her place stood someone I recognized all too well, calculating, angry, ready to lash out. How dare you? She shrieked. After everything I've done for you, you ungrateful, selfish boy. Tom didn't flinch. Ungrateful? You're right. I am. Unlike you, I won't be sending you to a state nursing home to die alone. Margaret recoiled as if she'd been slapped. Tom continued, his voice steady. I'm selling the house. You need to leave. Use the money and property your lover left you and stop trying to deceive and use everyone around you. Margaret's indignant screams could probably be heard down the block, but Tom remained unmoved. He gave her a deadline to vacate the house, and true to his word, he sold it soon after. We later learned that Margaret had moved into the apartment left to her by her lover, evicting the current tenants and having to pay a hefty sum for breaking their lease. She tried calling Tom a few times after that, alternating between tearful pleas and angry accusations, but we stood firm in our decision to cut ties. As the dust settled from this tumultuous period, Tom and I found ourselves looking toward the future. And what a future it was shaping up to be. I was pregnant. We decided to sell our apartment and look for a small house somewhere we could raise our child in peace, away from the shadows of the past. We were careful not to let any news of the pregnancy or our plans to move reach Margaret. The last thing we wanted was for her to find a way back into our lives, especially with a baby on the way. Driving away toward our new home and new life, I felt a sense of hope I hadn't experienced in years. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew Tom and I would face them together, stronger for having weathered the storm. Hi, I'm Serena, a 30-year-old art teacher with a small art business on the side. My life took an extraordinary turn 6 years ago when I met the love of my life, Archer, at an art gallery. I had been visiting the art gallery that day with a couple of friends, but I had gotten separated from them at some point. I didn't really pay much attention to it because I was too entranced by all the art around me. Eventually, I found this beautiful piece that just called out to me. I just kept staring at all the bright and lovely colors in the painting. My mind raced with various interpretations of it. However, it turned out the painting had not only entranced me, but also another gentleman. That gentleman was Archer. It was fate. Archer and I struck up a conversation about the painting. We must have stood in front of that painting for 15 minutes, just bouncing off our interpretations back and forth. Eventually, we decided to grab a coffee, and that marked the beginning of our beautiful relationship. Over the next 4 years, Archer and I built a blissful life together. Our love for art continued to bind us. We went on amazing dates and officially became a couple pretty quickly. When we decided it was time for us to introduce each other to our parents, we started with mine. My parents warmly accepted Archer as part of our family. I hoped that I would be treated the same way by Archer's parents. However, unfortunately, I didn't. To be more specific, Archer's mother, Irene, did not like me. She made it very obvious. At first, everything seemed to go smoothly during the introduction. They appeared to like me, and I genuinely enjoyed their company. However, things took an unexpected turn when Irene inquired about my profession. When I mentioned that I was an art teacher and had an online art business, her face dropped, and I could sense her disapproval. Without hesitation, she turned to Archer and asked him if he was seriously dating someone who didn't have a real job. Her words stung. and I felt hurt that she not only disregarded my profession, but also questioned our relationship. Before I could respond, Archer's father, Oscar, intervened, instructing Irene to shut up. "Irene, please stop this judgmental behavior. It's not fair to Serena." "Well, I can't help what I think. I just don't understand why Archer is with someone like her. It's not your place to judge. Serena is a wonderful person, and she makes Archer happy. That's what matters. I just don't think her job is good enough for our family." "That's not for you to decide. Serena is passionate about her art, and she's successful in her own right. We should support her dreams. I just worry about Archer's future with her. Archer is capable of making his own choices, and he loves Serena. We should respect that." "Well, forgive me for looking out for our son." "You're not looking out for him. You're being disrespectful to both of them. If you don't have anything nice to say, just don't say anything at all." Irene fell silent, and though dinner resumed, there was an uncomfortable tension in the air. I could feel the daggers of judgment Irene was shooting at me, and I felt really uncomfortable. Thankfully, Oscar sensed the need to break the ice and asked me to talk more about myself and my art business. I was relieved to have something positive to discuss, so I enthusiastically shared my passion for art and how each piece I sold felt like a step closer to becoming a better artist. Oscar listened intently, and I couldn't help but admire his open-mindedness and genuine interest in the work I did. As the evening drew to a close, Oscar bid us goodbye. As he hugged Archer goodbye, he told Archer that he was very proud of him for choosing a partner like me. It warmed both Archer's and my hearts. Despite the evening having been a little awkward, I finally felt accepted and loved by Archer's family. Well, at least one of them. After Archer dropped me off at my home, I told him how much I liked his dad. "Oscar, you know, babe, I liked your dad. He just seemed so kind and open-minded." "Yeah, he's always been the cool parent. He cares a lot about my happiness and safety. I'm glad he thinks I'm good enough for you. But I have to admit that I'm a little worried about your mom. She didn't seem to like me. I want her to accept me too." "I know, but give us some time. She's not quick to trust new people. But I'm sure she'll come around eventually." "I hope so. I want her to see how much I care about you and how happy we are together. Just be yourself, darling. I know she'll see what I see in you. We'll take it one step at a time." "You're right. I'll do my best to win her over and show her how much I love you and your family. That's all I can ask for, and I'll support you every step of the way." The next months were wonderful. As Archer and I moved in together, it felt like a dream, and our love grew even stronger. Not long after, Archer proposed, and I happily said yes. We were going to get married, and I was so excited to be with him forever. I also kept trying to connect with Irene, even though she was unsure about me at first. I hoped that, with patience and understanding, she would come to like me. I really wanted her to see how much Archer and I loved each other and to see me as part of their family. I wanted to show her that I truly loved her son for everything he was. I even tried to get her more involved in the art scene, not because I did art, but because Archer loved it. She was still cold and dismissive to me, no matter how hard I tried. As we planned the wedding, Irene's behavior became harder to handle. She kept giving unnecessary opinions and making fun of my choices. Archer tried to stand up to her, but she didn't listen, which made me frustrated. Thankfully, Oscar always stepped in and made her behave. Our wedding day finally came, and we were determined to have a beautiful ceremony, but Irene caused trouble during the ceremony and even tried to object. Luckily, Oscar stopped her quickly, making sure nothing spoiled our special moment. At the reception, Irene's disruptive behavior continued, but Oscar saved the day again. He firmly took her out of the hall to prevent more trouble. Later that night, he called us. "I'm sorry I had to leave the reception early, but I couldn't let Irene cause more problems for you both." "Oh, please don't apologize, Oscar. We're grateful for your support and understanding." "Yeah, Dad. I feel bad you didn't get to enjoy the reception because of her." "Don't worry about it, son. Your happiness is all that matters to me. You always know how to get my tears flowing. You're so selfless." "Well, I don't mind making sacrifices for you two. Just make sure you keep my son happy, Serena." "I promise I'll make your sacrifices worth it. You can count on that. I'll hold you to that promise." I felt blessed to have such a loving father-in-law. Despite Irene's difficult behavior, I found comfort in Oscar's presence and support. He cared about our happiness and stood up for us when needed. As time went on, Irene's antics only got worse. She found ways to sabotage every event we invited her to, causing tension and chaos. It reached a point where Oscar and Irene stopped attending our lunches, dinners, and many vacations altogether. Oscar didn't want Irene's behavior to cause more damage, so he chose to remove them both from these gatherings. But eventually, everything became too overwhelming for Oscar. It had been 2 years since he had properly spent time with his son. Every day, we had to deal with Irene's tantrums, and it took an immense toll on him emotionally and mentally. One night, Oscar came over to Archer's and my home, and we were shocked to see him breaking down in tears. Seeing Oscar, a stereotypically masculine man, so vulnerable, brought tears to both Archer's and my eyes. He poured his heart out to us, and we seated him in our living room. "It's just so hard to deal with Irene. I never imagined she could be this way, and it's even worse that she's robbing me of time with the people I love." "You don't have to go through this alone, Dad. Serena and I are here for you always." "And that's right. We miss spending time with you, but we understand the situation." "You do? I thought you might be upset with me for not being around." "Of course not, Oscar. We know it's not your fault. You've been dealing with so much, and we appreciate all you've done for us." "Yeah, Dad. We were talking about something important before you arrived. We've been considering the possibility of divorce." "What? Divorce?" "Oh, don't worry. It's not our marriage. It's about Irene and you. We were worried about how to approach the topic with you." "Yeah, we didn't want you to feel offended or hurt, but we thought it might be the best option considering everything." "Oh, thank goodness. I thought you meant you two were having issues. I was ready to fight Irene if that was the case, because I knew that nothing but her could make you guys want to divorce." "No, not at all. We're just concerned about your happiness and how Irene's behavior was affecting you. It's not fair that you have to struggle because of us. We want you to enjoy life and spend time with all the people you want to. Nobody should be holding you back." "Yeah, you're practically Mom's parent at this point, and I don't think you wanted to ever have to do that again after I moved out." "Oh, shut up, son. You were a joy to raise, but you are right about me not wanting to parent your mother. Thank you both for thinking of me. Of course, it's the least we could do after everything you've done for us. So, Dad, would you like to stay the night with us? You don't have to be in that stressful environment." "I would appreciate that. I had another big fight with Irene, and I could use a peaceful night." "Of course, you're welcome to stay as long as you like." "Yeah, let's go get you settled in. Tomorrow we can talk more about what you want to do. Thank you for being there for me. I don't know what I'd do without you two. We feel the same way about you. We're family, and we'll face whatever comes together." That night, as I lay in bed next to Archer, my heart felt heavy with mixed emotions. I was relieved that Oscar was opening up to us and that we could support him, but I couldn't help but feel sorry for the turmoil he was going through because of Irene. I wished there was a way to help him find happiness and peace. The following day, we sat down with Oscar and discussed the divorce process in more detail. We assured him that we were there for him every step of the way. Archer and I offered our love and support, reminding him that our family would always be a source of strength for him. The next couple of days were filled with filing for Oscar's divorce, a difficult and emotional process. To maintain peace at home and avoid any disruptions, Oscar went back to Irene pretending that everything was fine. Meanwhile, Archer had picked up the finalized divorce papers on his father's behalf and kept them in his cupboard. We were all thrilled for Oscar and looking forward to spending more time with him once the divorce was official. Archer called his dad to inform him about the papers, and Oscar planned to come to our place the next night to collect them. However, things took an unexpected turn when Irene went through Oscar's call log and saw that he had been talking to Archer without telling anyone. She showed up at our home, surprising both Archer and me. When we asked why she was there, Irene revealed that she wanted to know what we had been discussing with Oscar for so many days. "What I discuss with Dad is personal, and it's not something I need to share with you." "How can you say that? We're family, and family should be open with each other. I have the right to know what's going on." "I know that we're family, but that doesn't mean we have to share every detail of our lives. Everyone deserves their privacy and individuality." "This is ridiculous. I've always been involved in your life, and now you're shutting me out." "Irene, Archer has a right to his boundaries. It's not about shutting you out. It's about respecting each other's personal space. You're the reason our family is falling apart. Ever since you came into our lives, everything has changed. I understand that you might be feeling upset, but it's not fair to blame me for the issues in your family. If there's anyone to blame, it's yourself." "How dare you talk back to me like that? Archer, tell your wife to talk to me with respect." "Serena is right, Mom. She has always treated you with respect, but you can't expect her to take the blame for everything. Now I want you to leave our home." "No, I won't leave. You can't get me out like this." "I love you, but I won't tolerate this behavior. If you can't respect our boundaries, then you need to go." "Fine, I'll leave, but before that, I need to use the bathroom." "Well, our guest bedroom is undergoing renovations right now, so just hold it in until you get back home." "Then just let me use yours. I need to go, please." "Okay, fine, but be quick." As we waited for her to come back downstairs, Archer and I stayed in the kitchen. There was tension in the air, and I couldn't help but feel anxious. I wished Irene would leave soon so we could regain some peace. When Irene came back from the bathroom, she seemed determined. She had some papers in her hand and accused Archer of taking his mom's side. We were confused and asked her to explain. Irene waved the papers, claiming she found them in Archer's cupboard. Then she threw them at me. I was surprised and tried to catch them, but when I read what was written, I got even more confused. "I don't get it. Why do you look so happy?" "Oh my God, can you not read? Those are divorce papers. Archer was tired of you. Now my family can finally go back to how it used to be." "Why are you laughing? Are you crazy?" No. You've got it all wrong. Archer is not divorcing me. What do you mean? I saw these papers in Archer's cupboard. I don't know if you can read, Irene. Those papers aren't signed by Archer. They're signed by your husband, Oscar. They're the divorce papers that Oscar was planning to give you. What? But why? It was a funny moment to see Irene thought that I'd be a sobbing, inconsolable mess once I saw the divorce papers. And to see her become just that was so funny. Her plan to cause trouble backfired, and I felt triumphant. I realized how twisted Irene's thinking was. Instead of seeing how her actions pushed Oscar away, she assumed the worst about Archer and me. Setting boundaries with her was important. Seeing Irene's shocked expression made me happy. It showed we needed to stand our ground and not let her control us. Archer and I knew this was a turning point in dealing with her. I wondered how this revelation would change her behavior. Would she see the consequences of her actions and change? Or would she keep causing problems? Only time would tell. As Oscar walked into the house, he saw Irene with the divorce papers in her hands, and he knew it was time to make a life-changing decision. Irene saw him and immediately started yelling, demanding to know why he was divorcing her. Why are you divorcing me, Oscar? I can't believe you would do this. Irene, how did you get hold of the papers? Mom snooped around our room with the excuse of needing to use the bathroom. I needed to find out what you were both hiding from me. This is exactly why I can't continue with our marriage. You never respect my or anyone else's privacy or boundaries. I'm sorry. I promise I'll change. Please give me another chance. I've given you chances before, but you never change. I can't be with someone who is so disrespectful and inconsiderate. Dad's right. Your behavior is hurting all of us. Please, I'll do whatever it takes. Don't give up on me. It's too late. This decision is final. Mom, it's time to leave now. Reluctantly, Irene left the home, sobbing as she went. It was a painful scene to witness, but it was a necessary step for Oscar to reclaim his happiness and for Archer and me to have a healthier and more peaceful life together. In the aftermath of Irene's departure, our family dynamic shifted. Oscar's presence in our lives grew, and he spent more time with us than he had in years. It was heartwarming to see the bond between Archer and his father strengthen. Oscar's warmth and support were a beacon of comfort for both of us, and we cherished the time we spent together as a family. Over time, we learned to heal from the wounds left by Irene's destructive behavior. Archer and I supported each other through the process, growing even closer as a couple. We learned that we could face any challenge together as long as we had love and understanding between us. As the months passed, Irene tried to reach out to Oscar, seeking forgiveness and reconciliation, but Oscar stood strong in his decision, knowing that he deserved a life free from the constant turmoil that Irene brought. Instead of giving in to her pleas, he focused on building a life filled with happiness and positivity. Archer and I supported Oscar every step of the way. We knew that healing would take time, but we were determined to create a brighter future together. And with Oscar's guidance and love, we started to mend the scars left by Irene's toxic influence. In the end, the divorce from Irene marked a new beginning for all of us. We found strength in unity and the importance of setting healthy boundaries. With Oscar's unwavering support, Archer and I grew as individuals and as a couple. We chose to focus on the love we shared and the possibilities of a beautiful life ahead.
During our honeymoon, my mother-in-law pulled off a shocking betrayal by stealing my $25,000 diamond necklace. When we got home and I asked her about it, She exploded in anger. She slapped me hard and pushed me against the wall. To my surprise, my husband stood by her side. Heartbroken, I left the house, planning my revenge. They had no idea I had a big surprise coming that would change everything. My name's Lisa, and I'm a 30-year-old software developer living in San Francisco. When I think back to my life, I can still remember the excitement of my wedding day, the hope I felt for the future, and the way my heart swelled with love for my college sweetheart, James. We had met during our university years and bonded over late-night study sessions and shared dreams of what our lives would look like. I thought I had found my perfect partner. But as the saying goes, the path to true happiness isn't always smooth. Shortly after we exchanged vows, I realized that my fairy tale was beginning to unravel. The first signs of trouble were subtle, like a slow leak in a tire that gradually worsens until you're stranded on the side of the road. The culprit? James's mother, Martha. Martha, a woman in her mid-50s, raised James on her own and had always been fiercely protective of him. I had seen this dynamic during our dating years. She often called him several times a day, insisting on knowing his whereabouts and opinions on everything. I had assumed it was just a quirky part of their relationship, something I could work around. After all, love is about compromise, right? But once we were married, her interference turned into something much more invasive. Almost immediately, Martha began criticizing my choices, everything from the way I decorated our home to the meals I prepared. I remember one particular instance when she visited unannounced and found me experimenting with a new recipe. "What are you cooking, Lisa?" "That looks awful," she said with a disdainful look on her face, as if she were inspecting a science experiment gone wrong. "Just trying a new pasta dish, Martha," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "Isn't it a bit too rich?" "You should stick to the basics," she retorted, shaking her head. I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment, but I tried to brush it off. I thought she means well. I kept reminding myself that she was just trying to help, even when it felt like she was tearing me down. As weeks turned into months, her visits became more frequent and less welcome. She would drop by without calling, using a spare key that I didn't even know she had. I would walk into our living room, only to find her rearranging the furniture as if it were her own home. "This will give the space a better flow," she would say, waving her hand dismissively when I expressed my hesitations. The tension between Martha and me grew, and James seemed oblivious. Whenever I would try to bring it up, he would shrug it off, saying things like, "You know how my mom is. Just try to be patient." It was infuriating. How could he not see how her behavior was affecting me? I began to feel isolated, trapped in a situation where my voice was drowned out by his mother's constant interference. The love I felt for James started to fade under the weight of frustration and hurt. Then, one day, James suggested we go on a honeymoon to Hawaii, a chance to reconnect and escape the chaos. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Finally, a break for Martha. However, that relief was short-lived when Martha insisted on joining us. "James, I don't think that's a good idea," I said, trying to mask my panic. But James, for the first time, stood his ground. "Mom, it's not a family trip. It's our honeymoon, just Lisa and me." I was stunned. This was the first time I saw him assert himself against his mother, and it filled me with hope. Maybe there was a chance for us after all. When we returned from the trip, everything seemed to be in place. James and I had rekindled our romance, and I was excited to return home. But when I opened the door to our bedroom, my heart dropped. Our room was a disaster zone. Clothes were thrown everywhere, jewelry drawers were broken, and my precious diamond necklace, a wedding gift from my mother worth $25,000, was missing. "James, come here," I screamed, my voice shaking. "What's wrong?" he asked, rushing into the room. "I can't find my necklace. Look at this mess. What happened here?" I gestured wildly at the chaos. James's face paled as he surveyed the room. "I don't know." "This is so strange," he muttered, confusion and concern etched across his face. Desperate, I turned to him. "Do you think it could be?" "No, Lisa. I can't believe my mother would do something like this," he interrupted, his tone defensive. I swallowed hard, feeling a knot form in my stomach. But deep down, the suspicion crept in. I couldn't shake the feeling that Martha was somehow involved. I needed to find answers. That night, sleep eluded me as I tossed and turned, haunted by the disarray of our bedroom and the absence of my cherished necklace. I couldn't understand how Martha could betray me like this. The woman who I thought was merely overbearing had transformed into someone I feared. The following day, I decided to take action. I visited several jewelry stores in the area, searching for any sign of my necklace. After hours of looking and nearly giving up hope, I entered a small shop tucked away in a corner of the city. As I scanned the displays, my heart stopped. There it was, my diamond necklace gleaming under the glass. "Excuse me," I called the shopkeeper over. "Can I see that necklace, please?" When I held it in my hands, it felt like the ground beneath me shifted. I needed to know who had sold it. "Can you show me the CCTV footage from when this necklace came in?" I asked, my voice steady despite the chaos in my mind. The shopkeeper obliged, and as I watched the footage, my heart sank. There, clearly on the screen, was Martha, my mother-in-law, handing over my precious necklace. I felt a whirlwind of emotions: betrayal, anger, and disbelief. Furious, I rushed home, ready to confront her. But as I approached the door, I found Martha waiting for me, arms crossed and a smug smile on her face. "What are you doing here, Lisa? You look like you've seen a ghost," she sneered. "Don't play games with me, Martha." "I know what you did," I snapped, my heart pounding. Her smile faltered for a moment, and in that split second, I felt a surge of confidence. I had the proof, but what happened next would change everything. I was about to confront the woman who had wreaked havoc in my life. I just didn't know how deep the betrayal would run. Standing at the doorstep, I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. Martha's presence was suffocating, and I felt the anger bubbling inside me like a volcano ready to erupt. I had never imagined confronting my mother-in-law would feel like this, like stepping into a battlefield where the stakes were so high. "Lisa, why are you staring at me like that? If you have something to say, just say it," Martha said, her tone dripping with mockery. "Enough with the games, Martha. I know you sold my diamond necklace." I blurted out, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. "I saw you on the security footage at the jewelry store." Her expression changed instantaneously. The smugness vanished, replaced by a flicker of anger. "How dare you accuse me of stealing?" she retorted, her voice rising. "You've always had a wild imagination, haven't you?" "I'm not imagining anything. You took something that doesn't belong to you, and it's time you admit it." I shot back, stepping closer to her, unwilling to let her intimidation tactics work on me this time. Martha's eyes narrowed as she took a step forward, invading my personal space. "You think you can come into my house and throw accusations at me? You're just jealous that I raised James alone and that he still cares for me. You'll never be as important as his mother," she spat, her voice full of venom. "Being his wife doesn't mean I'm less important. You need to understand that I'm part of this family too, but you act like I'm just an inconvenience," I replied, my heart racing. I felt an overwhelming need to defend myself, to make her see that I was not going to back down this time. Suddenly, James walked through the door, a bag of groceries in hand. The moment he saw us standing there, tension thick in the air, he dropped the bag and rushed over. "What's going on? Why does it look like you two are about to kill each other?" "Martha has been lying to me, James. I know she sold my necklace, and I'm done pretending everything is fine," I said, my voice rising. I turned to him, desperate for support. "You need to believe me. I have proof." James looked between us, confusion etched on his face. "Mom, is this true?" he asked, his tone wavering. "I didn't do anything. Lisa is just trying to stir up trouble because she can't handle the fact that I'm still in your life," Martha interjected, throwing her hands up defensively. James's gaze shifted from his mother to me, and I could see the turmoil in his eyes. "I need to hear this from both of you. What exactly happened?" he asked, trying to mediate. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. "I found the necklace in a pawn shop, James. I have the footage." Your mother sold it while we were on our honeymoon, I explained, the words rushing out of me. James turned to Martha, who was now visibly sweating, her composure cracking. Is that true? Did you sell Lisa's necklace? I borrowed it, she stammered, trying to twist the narrative. I thought it was just lying around. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. Borrowed? It's not borrowing if you sell it, I shouted, my frustration boiling over. You stole it. You knew how much it meant to me. Stop yelling, both of you, James shouted, his voice echoing in the small entryway. This is not helping. Mom, why would you do something like this? It was a mistake. Martha snapped, her defensive nature kicking in. I thought it was just an old piece of jewelry, something that was forgotten. I didn't know it was special to her. Enough of your excuses, I exclaimed. You've done nothing but disrespect me since day one. I've tried to be patient, but this is crossing a line. James's silence was deafening. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for him to pull me back or let me fall. I can't believe this, James finally said, looking defeated. Mom, you have to understand what you did is unacceptable. We need to figure out how to fix this. Fix this? How can we fix this when she's made it clear she doesn't trust me? I said, pointing at Martha. I'm done being the one who has to compromise. You need to make a choice, James. Martha's eyes flashed with anger as she took a step back, her expression darkening. You think you can come into our family and make demands? You're nothing without my son. That statement stung like a slap to the face, and I felt tears prick my eyes. I am not nothing. I am his wife, and I deserve your respect. James looked between us, visibly torn. I need time to think, he finally said, his voice low. I can't deal with this right now. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me alone with Martha. The tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I felt a sense of despair wash over me, knowing that things had reached a breaking point. Your husband is weak, Lisa, Martha sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. You'll never win this fight. I will always be his mother. In that moment, I knew I couldn't stay in this toxic environment any longer. I felt like a puppet on strings, and it was time to cut them. I needed to reclaim my life, my identity, and my dignity. With that thought, I turned on my heel and walked out, determined to find a way to seek justice for the betrayal I had suffered. Leaving James and Martha in that heated moment was one of the hardest things I had ever done. I felt like I was walking away from my marriage, but I knew that staying would only lead to more heartache. As I drove back to my mother's house, my heart raced with a mix of fear and determination. I couldn't let Martha's betrayal go unpunished. When I arrived, my mother was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared dinner. The smell of her famous lasagna filled the air, and for a brief moment, I felt comforted. But the weight of my troubles came crashing back as I recounted the events of the day. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry you're going through this, my mother said, her eyes filled with concern. You deserve so much better. I need to do something about it, Mom. I can't just let her get away with this, I replied, my voice firm. I'm going to report her to the police. My mother's face reflected my own determination. If that's what you think is best, then I support you. We'll gather any evidence you need. That night, we pored over the footage from the jewelry store and made a list of everything that had happened. I documented my conversations with James, highlighting how dismissive he had been about Martha's behavior. I felt empowered, like I was taking back control over my life. The next day, I contacted the local police department and scheduled an appointment to report the theft. As I prepared for my meeting, I felt a whirlwind of emotions, nervousness, anger, but also a sense of purpose. I was no longer the quiet wife being pushed around. I was ready to stand up for myself. When I arrived at the station, I was greeted by an officer who took me into a small room to discuss my case. I showed him the footage of Martha selling the necklace and explained the situation. The officer listened intently, nodding along as I spoke. This is a serious matter, Ms. Miller. Theft is not something we take lightly. We'll need to investigate further, but I assure you that we will do everything we can to help you, he said, his tone reassuring. Relief washed over me as I left the station. I had taken the first step toward justice, and I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was determined to see this through, no matter how hard it might be. Over the next few days, the police worked diligently on my case, collecting evidence and reaching out to pawn shops in the area. They were able to confirm the sale of my necklace and also uncovered additional details that pointed to Martha's history of questionable behavior. One afternoon, as I was sitting at my mother's kitchen table, my phone rang. It was the officer I had spoken to earlier. "Ms. Miller, we've gathered enough evidence to move forward with an arrest. Would you like to be present when we take your mother-in-law into custody?" he asked. I hesitated for a moment, the gravity of the situation hitting me. But then I remembered how much Martha had hurt me, how she had invaded my life and disrespected my marriage. "Yes, I want to be there," I replied, my voice steady. The following day, I drove to the location where they had planned to arrest Martha. My heart raced as I waited, anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. I couldn't believe it had come to this. My mother-in-law, the woman who was supposed to support me, was about to face the consequences of her actions. When the police arrived, they approached Martha as she was leaving her house, her usual air of arrogance stripped away. I watched from a distance, my heart pounding in my chest. "Martha Ellen, you are under arrest for theft," the officer announced, and I felt a surge of triumph rush through me. This was justice. As they handcuffed her and led her away, I stood there, watching her world crumble. I realized that I was finally free from the chains that had bound me, and in that moment, I felt empowered. I was no longer the victim. I was a survivor, ready to reclaim my life. The day Martha was arrested marked a pivotal moment in my life. I had faced her down and taken control of my own narrative. After the police took her away, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and an undeniable sense of empowerment. I knew that I had done the right thing, but the reality of the situation weighed heavily on my heart. In the days that followed, I found myself in a whirlwind of legal processes. Martha's arrest led to charges of theft, and I learned that she would likely face serious consequences for her actions. I felt a sense of closure starting to form, but I also had to confront the fact that my marriage with James was hanging by a thread. James reached out to me multiple times, pleading for a chance to talk. I was hesitant, but knew we needed to address the elephant in the room. One evening, we met at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. As I walked in, I felt a mixture of hope and dread. Could we salvage our relationship, or had too much damage been done? "Lisa, I'm so glad you agreed to meet," James said, his voice shaky as he sat down across from me. "I've been worried sick about you." "I've been worried about you too, James," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "But we need to talk about everything that's happened. You need to understand how hurtful your mother's actions were and how your support, or lack thereof, affected me." He nodded, looking down at his coffee. "I know. I can't believe she would do something like that. I should have stood up for you sooner. I'm sorry." "Sorry isn't enough, James. Your mother has caused irreparable harm," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I've lost trust in both of you. You need to decide whose side you're on." "I'm on your side, Lisa." "I love you," he exclaimed, desperation creeping into his voice. "Then you need to prove it." "I can't continue in a marriage where I feel like a second-class citizen," I replied, trying to keep my emotions in check. "You need to choose between me and her." We talked for hours, but it was clear that the rift between us was too wide. Although he professed his love for me, I couldn't shake the feeling that his loyalty to his mother would always come first. As we parted ways that evening, I knew I had made my decision. The following week, I filed for divorce. It was painful, but I felt lighter, as if I had shed a weight I had been carrying for far too long. Martha's court date was set for a few weeks later. When the day arrived, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation as I entered the courtroom. I wanted to see justice served, to show Martha that her actions had consequences. When she walked in, she looked older, more haggard than I had ever seen her. It was a stark reminder of how far things had fallen. The proceedings were swift. The evidence was clear, and it didn't take long for the judge to issue a verdict. Martha was sentenced to community service and ordered to pay restitution for the necklace, along with additional fines totaling $25,000. As the gavel struck, I felt a surge of vindication. This was justice, and I had finally reclaimed my life. With the divorce finalized shortly after and Martha's fate sealed, I began to embrace my newfound freedom. I focused on my career, pouring my energy into projects that inspired me. I took up new hobbies, explored the city, and spent quality time with my mother, who had been my rock throughout this tumultuous journey. In the months that followed, I learned to cherish my independence. I discovered my strength in solitude and began to rebuild my life on my terms. I reflected on the lessons I had learned about trust, respect, and the importance of standing up for myself. As I sat in my apartment one evening, sipping a glass of wine and watching the sunset over the city skyline, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I was no longer bound by the toxicity of my past. I had turned the page and was ready to embrace a bright new chapter filled with hope and possibilities. I had faced betrayal and fought for justice, and now I was finally free.
My name is Rebecca, and I'm an artist. Not the kind you see in fancy galleries, but the kind who spends her days in a modest charity center, painting with kids who've seen more than they should. I've always believed that art can heal, and every day I see it happen with these children. I live with my husband, Mark, a sales manager who's always chasing the next big deal, and his mother, Martha, who's never seen a reason to hold back her opinion. Our home is a constant buzz of Mark's phone calls and Martha's TV shows. It's not easy, but it's life. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I decided to share some exciting news. Mark, Martha, I entered some of my paintings and the kids' artwork in a city contest. The prize is $100,000. Mark, scrolling through his phone, didn't even look up. That's nice, Rebecca, but let's be real. What are the chances? Martha snorted. With those street kids' drawings? You're dreaming, dear. I tried to explain. It's not just about the prize. It's about showing what these kids can do, how they express their... Mark cut me off. Rebecca, why don't you find a real job? Something that actually pays? I sighed, looking at my half-chopped vegetables. It's important to me, Mark. This job, these kids, they matter. Moreover, my salary at the center is quite enough to pay bills and food. Martha waved a dismissive hand. We need real money, Rebecca, not child's play. I finished dinner in silence. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and disappointment. I believed in my dream, in the magic of art, and maybe, just maybe, the contest could be a new beginning. But at home, it felt like my dreams were nothing but whispers in a storm. I closed my eyes, picturing the colorful, chaotic art room at the center, the place where my heart felt fullest. Tomorrow, I'd go back there, to my little haven of paints and smiles, away from the doubts and the cold reality of my home life. This contest, it was more than a chance for money. It was a chance to prove to myself, and maybe to Mark and Martha, that what I do is valuable, that it has the power to change lives. And with that thought, I drifted off to sleep, dreaming of vibrant colors and the sound of children's laughter. Each day at the Charity Center was a journey into a world where paint and canvas became tools of transformation. There, surrounded by children who had seen the darker side of life, I found my purpose. We painted murals together, walls turned into vibrant stories of hope, each brushstroke a testament to their resilience. I remember one afternoon, a shy little boy, Timmy, who had never picked up a brush before, created a bright sun with rays stretching across the wall. His smile, as he stepped back to admire his work, was brighter than the sun he'd painted. Moments like these were my daily reminders of why I did what I did. But at home, the story was starkly different. One evening, I returned home, still carrying the joy of the day's achievements. Eager to share, I approached Mark and Martha in the living room. Mark, look at this, I said, showing him a picture of the mural. Timmy painted this sun. He's never drawn anything before. Mark glanced at the photo and then back at his phone. That's nice, but it's just a drawing, Rebecca. Kids doodle all the time. Frustration welled up inside me. It's not just a doodle, Mark. It's a big step for him. He's been through so much. Martha cut in sharply. Rebecca, when will you stop playing therapist with paint? It's a child's drawing, nothing more. You need to start living in the real world. Her words felt like a slap. It's not just playing, Martha. These kids, they find a voice through their art. It's healing for them. Mark let out an exasperated sigh. Healing? What about our mortgage, Rebecca? Your healing isn't going to cover it. You need a real job. I clenched my fists, trying to control the rising tide of anger and hurt. This is a real job, Mark. It's making a difference. Martha snorted. Difference? What difference does it make when I'm ashamed to tell my friends where you work? You need to wake up and see reality, Rebecca. I stood there, words failing me. The gap between my world at the center and my world at home had never felt so vast. In one, I was helping to rebuild lives. In the other, I was constantly reminded of my supposed inadequacy. That night, in the solitude of my studio, I stared at the blank canvas. The harsh words from earlier echoed in my mind, drowning out the laughter and joy of the day. I picked up my brush, and with each stroke, I tried to paint away the hurt, the doubt, and the feeling of being undervalued. The day was winding down at the charity center, the walls echoing with the lingering laughter of children. I was cleaning up the paints when my phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number. "Hello, Rebecca Thompson speaking," I answered. "Miss Thompson, this is John Harris from the City Arts Council. Congratulations, you've won our citywide art contest. The prize is $100,000. We'll be in touch soon for further details and discuss an additional opportunity to collaborate with the city." The news hit me like a wave. I won? My voice trembled with a mix of shock and joy. "Yes, indeed. Your and the children's work truly stood out," John replied, his voice warm with genuine admiration. I thanked him profusely and hung up, my heart racing. This was beyond my wildest dreams, a validation of our efforts, of the children's talent, and, in some way, of my own. I shared the news with the children, and their reaction was heartwarming. Their cheers and claps filled the room with an energy that was almost tangible. This was our collective victory. Later, as the center quieted down, I sat with Lisa, the psychologist, over a cup of tea. I shared my apprehensions about breaking the news at home. Mark and his mother have never really seen the value in what I do. They might just see the money, I confided. Lisa leaned forward, her eyes thoughtful. Why not test their reaction? See if this win changes their attitude. It might reveal their true colors. Her suggestion struck a chord. At home, my work had always been trivialized, its impact constantly undermined. This win, this significant recognition, could indeed be the litmus test for their genuine sentiments. I pondered over Lisa's advice as I made my way home. The idea was both unsettling and necessary. If the money swayed their attitudes, it would uncover the uncomfortable truth about their regard for me and my work. Stepping into the house that evening, I decided to hold off on sharing the news just yet. I wanted to observe, to plan my approach carefully. Lisa's words echoed in my mind, and I knew she was right. It was time to find out the truth, however uncomfortable it might be. I went to bed that night with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. I was sure of Mark's love, or at least I wanted to be. But Lisa's proposal was an opportunity to see beyond my hopes, to understand the reality of my home life. I agreed with her. It was a test worth taking. That evening, I decided it was time to put my plan into action. Sitting at the dinner table with Mark and Martha, I took a deep breath and said, "I have something to tell you. I won the city art contest. The prize is $100,000. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Mark's fork dropped to his plate with a clatter, and Martha's eyes widened in disbelief. $100,000? Rebecca, that's incredible, Mark exclaimed, his usual indifference replaced by a surprising enthusiasm. Martha, who had always been quick with a critical word about my job, suddenly softened. "Dear, that's wonderful news. We're so proud of you," she said, her tone unusually warm. During the meal, Martha fussed over me more than she ever had, offering me the best pieces of chicken and constantly refilling my glass. Mark, too, was uncharacteristically attentive, asking about my artwork and the contest in detail. Their newfound affection was overwhelming, almost suffocating. I noticed them exchanging glances, a silent communication that I couldn't decipher. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and the usual cold, dismissive atmosphere had transformed into one of exaggerated warmth and interest. Later that evening, I stepped out of my room to get a glass of water and overheard a hushed conversation coming from the living room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I quietly moved closer. "We can finally redo the kitchen like we wanted," I heard Martha say in a hushed tone. "And get that new car. We deserve it after all," Mark added, his voice laced with greed. There was a pause before Martha spoke again. "Once we have the money, we can think about... Well, Rebecca doesn't really need to stay here anymore, does she?" My heart sank as I listened. Their words were like daggers, revealing their true intentions. The affectionate dinner wasn't for me. It was for the money. They were already planning to spend my winnings on themselves and even discussing getting rid of me. I quietly retreated to my room, their words echoing in my ears. The test had revealed their true colors, and they were darker than I had imagined. I lay in bed, a mix of hurt and clarity washing over me. This was not the love and support of a family. It was opportunism, plain and simple. As I closed my eyes, the weight of their betrayal pressed heavily on my heart. The truth was out, and now I had to decide what to do with it. The morning air was tense as I sat down for breakfast with Mark and Martha. The news I was about to break would surely stir the pot, but I was determined to see it through. Casually, I started, "I've decided what to do with the contest money." They both perked up, leaning in with a keen interest that had been absent before. "I'm donating the entire $100,000 to the charity center," I said, watching their faces for reaction. The response was immediate and explosive. "What?" Mark slammed his hand on the table, his face red with anger. "Are you out of your mind, Rebecca?" Martha's voice was shrill, filled with disbelief and outrage. "You're giving away our ticket to a comfortable life? You foolish girl!" I remained calm, though their words stung. "It's not our money. It's mine, and those kids need it more than we do." Mark's voice was laced with scorn. "This is the most idiotic thing I've ever heard. You're a fool, Rebecca." Martha's anger bubbled over, her words harsh and unfiltered. "You've always been a disgrace, pretending to be some saint with those street kids. And now this? Throwing away a fortune?" I tried to explain. "It's not throwing it away. It's helping children who have nothing." But Mark was relentless. "It's not just about the money. You've always been this way, naive and foolish. I should have seen it sooner. I was planning to wait, spend the money first, but now? Now I want a divorce, Rebecca. I can't be with someone who throws away opportunities like this." His words cut through me, but they also brought clarity. This was the reality of our marriage, stripped of any pretense. I looked at them both, my decision firm. If that's how you feel, then it's clear to me now. This marriage, this relationship, was never about us. It was about convenience, about money. Without another word, I stood up and walked away from the table, away from the vitriol and greed. Their shouts and insults followed me, but they no longer had the power to hurt me. I had seen the truth, and it had set me free. The days following my announcement were cold and quiet. The house felt more like a battleground than a home. Mark and Martha avoided me, their disappointment and anger hanging in the air like a thick fog. I was packing some of my belongings in the bedroom when Mark walked in. His face was hard, his eyes void of the warmth I once knew. "So, you're really doing this? Throwing away our life for some charity?" he asked, his voice edged with bitterness. "I'm not throwing away our life, Mark. I'm choosing to do what's right with my money," I replied, folding a sweater into my suitcase. He let out a harsh laugh. "Your money? It was supposed to be our ticket out of here, Rebecca, and you just gave it away like it was nothing." "It was never about the money for me, Mark. It's about helping those kids, something you never understood." His frustration boiled over. "You're so blinded by your so-called mission that you can't see the real world. You're a dreamer, Rebecca, and dreamers don't survive." I zipped up my suitcase, feeling the finality of the moment. Maybe that's the difference between us, Mark. I dream of making a difference, while you dream of money." Mark's face tightened. "You know what, Rebecca? Maybe it's better this way. I can't be with someone who doesn't see reality. I want a divorce." The words stung, but they didn't surprise me. "If that's what you want, Mark." He turned to leave, then stopped. "You were always a fool, Rebecca. I just didn't see it until now." After he left the room, I sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of his words sinking in. The love I thought we had was overshadowed by greed and misunderstanding. As I carried my suitcase downstairs, Martha didn't even look at me. Her disdain was clear, her silence louder than any words. Stepping out of the house, I felt a sense of relief mixed with sorrow. The chapter of my life with Mark and Martha had closed, but ahead of me was a path of my own making. I got into the taxi, glancing back at the house one last time. This wasn't just an end, it was a beginning of a life where I could be true to myself and my dreams, free from the chains of greed and misunderstanding. The day to sign the divorce papers arrived with a mix of relief and finality. I walked into the lawyer's office, feeling a sense of purpose. Mark was there, and to my surprise, Martha accompanied him. Their presence together was a stark reminder of the life I was leaving behind. As we sat down, Martha didn't waste any time. "You're making a huge mistake, Rebecca. Throwing away a marriage over some charity money," she hissed, her tone laced with disdain. "And how do you plan to survive? With your tiny salary? You can't even afford a decent place to live," she continued, her words sharp and biting. Mark sat silently, casting contemptuous glances at me. I listened to Martha's tirade, feeling a strange detachment. Their words no longer had the power to hurt me. Once the paperwork was done, and it was time to leave, I turned to them, a smile playing on my lips. "You know, I was just testing you," I said, their confused looks fueling my confidence. "Testing us?" Mark echoed, puzzled. "Yes, I wanted to see how you'd react if I said I was donating all the money, and you both showed your true colors." Martha's face contorted in confusion. "What are you saying?" "I'm not giving all the money to charity. That was a lie. And the city? They've given me several lucrative projects. I'm going to be just fine," I said, the satisfaction of revealing the truth making my words strong and clear. The color drained from Mark's face, and Martha's mouth hung open in shock. Their reaction was everything I had expected and more. Mark suddenly found his voice, desperation seeping through. "Rebecca, please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean any of it. Can we start over?" I looked at him, once my husband, now a stranger begging for a second chance. "No, Mark, we can't. You showed me who you really are, and I have no desire to be with someone like that." Turning to Martha, I added, "And you, Martha, should know that money isn't everything. What I do, my work, it matters more than any luxury you crave." Without another word, I walked out of the office, leaving them behind in their shock and disbelief. I walked into the sunlight, feeling lighter and more confident than I had in years. The divorce was the end of a painful chapter, but it was also the beginning of something new. A chapter where I was the author of my own story, unburdened by others' greed and deception. It was a freedom hard-earned and well-deserved. The months following my separation from Mark and Martha unfolded like a series of vibrant brushstrokes on a once blank canvas. I found myself immersed in a new rhythm of life, one that echoed with the sounds of children's laughter at the charity center and the quiet concentration of my work on city projects. My world, once confined to the expectations and criticisms of a household that didn't understand me, had expanded into a realm where my passion for art and my dedication to helping others were not just acknowledged, but celebrated. I had rented a small apartment in a quaint part of town. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine, a sanctuary where the walls were adorned with my paintings and the cheerful artwork of the children from the center. Each piece told a story, a reminder of the journey I had embarked on and the lives that had intertwined with mine. The decision to donate half of my prize money to the charity center had set a series of unexpected events in motion. The local newspapers and community blogs picked up the story, intrigued by the artist who chose charity over personal gain. My phone began ringing with inquiries and offers. Local gallery owners, once indifferent, were now eager to showcase my work. My paintings, which had been a source of solace in my darkest times, were now being admired in well-lit galleries, appreciated by people who saw in them the same hope and beauty that I did. The city projects, too, brought a newfound recognition. I was commissioned to design murals for public spaces, transforming bland walls into tapestries of color and life. Each project was a new adventure, an opportunity to leave a mark on the city that had become my larger canvas. In the midst of this newfound success, I occasionally received messages from Mark. His texts, laden with apologies and pleas for a second chance, were a stark reminder of the life I had left behind. I read them, sometimes with a mocking smile, but mostly with a sense of detachment. The pain he had caused was a part of my past, a chapter that had closed the day I walked out of that house. His words, once capable of cutting me deeply, now seemed superficial, like ripples on the surface of a lake that could not disturb its depths. Evenings in my apartment were a time of reflection and creativity. I would often sit by the window, a cup of tea in hand, looking out at the city lights, thinking about the twists and turns my life had taken. The betrayal and hurt had been a crucible, burning away the illusions and leaving behind a clarity of purpose. I realized I had found strength in my vulnerability, courage in facing the unknown, and an unshakable belief in the power of art to heal and transform. On weekends, I conducted art workshops at the charity center. The children, each with their own story of resilience, continued to be my greatest inspiration. We painted together, our collective imagination turning blank canvases into expressions of joy, pain, and hope. I saw in their eyes the reflection of my own journey, a testament to the healing power of art. As the city embraced my work, my personal life, too, began to flourish in new ways. I made friends in the art community, a group of eclectic and supportive individuals who appreciated me for who I was. We shared stories, laughed, and dreamed together. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of belonging. One evening, as I finished a painting for an upcoming exhibition, I stepped back to take it all in. The vibrant colors on the canvas, the sense of accomplishment, the peace that filled my heart. It was a far cry from the days of doubt and belittlement. I had emerged from the shadows of a stifling relationship into the light of self-discovery and fulfillment. As I closed the lights that night and settled into bed, I thought about the future. It was unwritten, full of unknowns, but I was no longer afraid. I had weathered the storm and found my rainbow on the other side. My story was one of transformation, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there is the potential for a masterpiece, and I was just getting started.
World and lie down there. After taking in the mountain's spiritual essence, they head back to the city. A few others mentioned how leading a life that is so different from their regular routine enables them to face their own issues. I noticed that I was getting more invested in this work than I had anticipated. At first, I was merely interested in taking cool pictures, but after hearing different accounts, I made the decision to document them accurately. They were faster and more energetic than any people I had ever seen in the city as they raced over the mountains. I clutched tenaciously and snapped furiously at my camera. The time spent filming appeared to go by quickly. When it was all over, I was in disbelief. All that was left was the knowledge that my small-mindedness had limited my perspective and abilities. It's okay, I feel like I should tell my former self, who had walled himself off in a mistrustful shell. Step right out. From the bottom of my heart, I felt that way. It seemed like everything had changed during the days I spent with the mountain hermits, and I believe that was a turning point in my life. I began intentionally performing the things I had been avoiding as evidence. I started to say yes to requests to go out drinking with coworkers I never went out with or to gatherings my employer threw. At work, I started to speak up more and was able to discuss things with my coworkers. The weight of the constraints I had put on myself astounded me. As I opened my heart, I was even startled to feel as though I could see farther out. And that's me, prepared to take on a fresh task right now. Normally, I would toss it in the garbage, but this time, it was an invitation to a reunion of middle school classmates. I haven't been able to attend the 2 reunions that have occurred thus far. I didn't even say anything. I must have been an eyesore to my classmates in middle school. Though I doubt anyone would want to see me, I plucked up the guts to record my attendance this time. My heart is full with expectation that by going to the reunion I've always avoided, I'll get to explore a whole new universe. There's also a glimmer of hope. I want to see Miranda White again, the girl I admired so much in the past. Up until the reunion day, I was filled with excitement and a little sense of expectancy. When I announced my name at the reception on the day of the reunion, the girl in charge of registration gave me a startled look twice. Clearly, she didn't think I would be there. She was probably one of the girls that looked up to Samantha Smith, our class's queen bee. Our middle school class was clearly divided into roles. Samantha Smith was at the top. She was attractive, with a slightly aged face, but I couldn't handle her forceful demeanor. Samantha was incredible because she knew how beautiful she was and knew how to use it to her advantage. With it, she ran the entire class. It sickens me to think about how she took pleasure in manipulating her peers. Samantha is likely to be at the location as well. She's also been a negative experience for me. When we passed each other at the classroom door, our shoulders most likely touched slightly because she was in a terrible mood. It wasn't intentional, of course. She fussed over it a much. Every girl in the class took Samantha's side. They seemed to be competing to see who could help her out first. They feared that if they moved too slowly, Samantha might turn her attention toward them. Samantha frightened everyone. Ultimately, the girls got me out of the classroom and made me spend the rest of the day in the nurse's office. Looking back on it today, it's still a bad recollection. Although I don't feel like meeting that individual right now, I'll just make the same mistake again if I flee now. I inhaled deeply before going inside the location. Nearly everybody had assembled at the reunion site, which was set up as a standing cocktail party. I recognized a couple people at a glance that I just dimly recognized. Unconsciously, I searched for Miranda White's figure. This is probably not the kind of setting where she would reveal her face. Miranda was nowhere to be found at the location, as I had anticipated. As I was looking around the venue, a voice said to me, I can't believe it. You really showed up." It was my classmate Phil Johnson. He was one of the ones who had led the charge in ignoring me since he was annoyed with me. Is it possible that when Phil gets older, he will start talking to people? I said in an average voice, "Phil, you still have the look from our middle school days." I was not going to fall for Phil's petty bait. Phil kept bugging me, obviously not happy with my demeanor. "You've developed the ability to respond in such a lifeless manner while steaming maturity. At work, though, you're presumably still an outsider, right? You know, people who are similar to you are considered social misfits." Is he a tad tipsy? Phil had a crimson face. As Phil had said, that's true. I'm kind of an outsider, I agreed. It wasn't false. Why is it the case? Making an effort to behave like an adult. It seemed that my casual dismissal of his sarcasm irritated him. Phil's voice became more and more audible. What's going on? People started to huddle up around Phil and myself gradually. After all, I've become older. I take it you have too, Phil. You can't stay in middle school forever, I remarked. My remarks made Phil's face flush. It's likely that he finally recognized how embarrassing his actions were. "John, you realize how much you've changed since turning mature. You were always attractive. Aren't you well liked these days?" Abruptly, the crowd parted, and Samantha Smith emerged through the opening. Nothing had changed from middle school. The positive attitude toward me was the only thing that was different. Both back then and now, nothing had changed. In my entire life, I have never been popular, I replied with a sour smile. Samantha widened her eyes. They were eyes, attempting to find the truth in my words. Samantha has this probing, scrutinizing look in her eyes that I have always detested. I remembered, disgusted, how Samantha's remarks following these assessments were directly related to my grade in the class. That's something, though. John, please come over here. There is much for us to catch up on. Right now, I was supposed to be with Samantha, the queen bee. Phil's furious eyes blazed at me. Everyone in the class knew that Phil had affections for Samantha from the beginning. Samantha was the butt of jokes, and I took her away, and I thought Phil must be boiling with wrath. Samantha had been playing with Phil's heart all along, so she knew how he felt. Oh, and during middle school, you were dating Miranda, correct? I had the pleasure of seeing you during graduation. You would be better off with damaged goods like Miranda. Samantha doesn't fit you. My eyes automatically went to Phil's suggestive remarks. Overreacting was a mistake. I turned and whistled, and Phil gave me a look. What did you see, huh? Did you date Miranda? Samantha looked astonished as she turned to face Phil. Phil struck up a triumphant conversation. My intention was to confess to Miranda on the day of graduation. Miranda was unremarkable even on her graduation day, but long after the ceremony was over, she remained at the window and gazed at the school gate. It was my only opportunity as we were scheduled to attend different high schools. Miranda, that was my name. Miranda turned around gradually. I think she noticed that I was staring at her. A scar the shape of a cord ran straight down her pale skin, from her left eye to her collarbone. I had heard rumors from someone that it was a big accident wound. Phil referred to Miranda as damaged goods because of this scar. You know, after we graduate, I stumbled over my words, finding it difficult to speak. It was hard to express what I had been planning since the previous evening when I looked into her direct eyes. All I wanted to do was acquire her number. I started to get anxious. Then Miranda gave a small smile. Don't be nervous around me, you weirdo, she added with a somewhat amused yet dignified tone. I believe that Miranda's statements to me marked the beginning of our actual conversation. Are we going to separate high schools? Today is the last day. Miranda whispered something deeply emotional, and I had no idea what to respond to her. Her body began to tremble as if the wind were carrying it. She leaped next to me with remarkable quickness and stood in my arms. She extended herself upward, pressing my shoulders with both hands. My cheek was kissed by her warm breath. Something gentle stroked my cheek the next moment. Her hands that had been on my shoulders vanished in a second, along with the sensation. I dodged it as soon as I recognized it was Miranda's lips, embarrassed as hell. What? I sat down on the area by accident, buckling at the knees. Miranda laughed as she watched me. Her face was also a little red. I had intended to make my initial impression. John, you won't forget me now, will you? She told me this, looking triumphant, and then she was gone like the wind from the room. Just like in a dream, I was left on my own. I put a hand to my cheek and noticed that it was a little heated. Miranda and I kept this a secret from one another. At the time, I was unaware that someone had been prying into our privacy. I didn't want someone to tarnish my recollections, even if it seemed inevitable that someone had seen us. I glared at Phil now. Phil took a satisfied look at my altered complexion. Just as he was about to proudly divulge my secret to Miranda, the front door opened and a voice yelled out, "John." Immediately, everyone's gaze was fixed on the entryway. "John, glad to find you." Like before, Miranda ran to me like the wind as soon as she saw me. My heart pounded louder with this unexpected reunion. "I'm grateful, John. I wanted to let you know that simple." Miranda bowed very low in front of me, ignoring the peers gathered around. "May I ask what you mean?" What? Like I did on graduation day, I unintentionally replied. Where had the adult be gone from just now? That's how astonished I felt. Miranda gave a book to me. It was the photo album I made, themed on artistic mountain practices, kind of like a spiritual retreat. An album of pictures that belong just to the people involved and not in stores yet. Huh. How do you have this? My mind was racing since there were so many things I didn't grasp. Samantha yelled, "This is the photo album taken by Noah, isn't it?" as she peered over Miranda's shoulder at the album. He shoots subjects other than models. I was ignorant of this. A group of girls gathered after Samantha's remarks. They all had a look at Noah's pictures. I became ashamed of myself for being there. I go by Noah while I work as a photographer. Nobody else is aware of this other identity. This is indeed my brother. I had John take these for me. Upon perusing this photo book, I at last comprehended my father and sibling. John was the one who ended the spell that was enclosing me. Miranda held up the photo album like it was something special. Wait, Noah is John. A whisper went through the group at Samantha's statements. There's a little explanation behind this. After all, Noah's models are all superstars. This is the superstition that I am connected to. Yes, after I shoot any unknown model, it takes off. Of course, their own diligence plays a role, but having a picture taken by me is now seen as a shortcut to achievement. Are these hermits in the mountains your brothers? Disregarding Samantha's message, I inquired Miranda. With a wise nod, Miranda informed me. The hermits are the half-brothers of Miranda. She claimed that she and her father are not related by blood. The fragile mother of her daughter remarried as a second wife and died soon after. After her mother passed away, Miranda was left grieving at home, while her brothers and father left to live as monastics. After being left alone at home, Miranda progressively hardened her heart. At school, things were the same. She kept herself to herself, not wanting to disappoint other people. She most likely avoided getting injured because she didn't expect anything from anyone. She would have liked to accompany them, but many of the sacred mountains are inaccessible to women. What on earth were they doing, leaving her behind? Miranda was wary of everything. She was constantly against her father and brothers because she didn't think they needed to do anything so significant to leave her feeling so alone. I noticed the candid picture he took with you when my brothers gave me this photo book. John, I recognized you immediately away. Miranda finally comprehended them when she saw the sincere pictures I had taken of her brothers. Thank you for showing me the truth. As she spoke, she met my eyes directly. The scars on her face were visible even with makeup on. Samantha moved her body to be in the way of Miranda and me just as I turned to talk to her. John, please take a photo of me. I'm modeling, you know that. With a charming smile, Samantha continued, as a favor to a classmate. Her attitude of being a queen had disappeared. She works as a model, as far as I know. She had a poor reputation among makeup artists. I don't shoot anything ugly, sorry. My actual feelings were expressed right away, and Samantha's cheeks brightened red. She must never have experienced such public humiliation before. I could hear the girls surrounding us laughing. Right now, the only one I want to photograph in this venue is Miranda in front of me. Raising her hand in a fit of wrath, Samantha appeared to pull back just in time. She didn't seem to want to draw attention to herself anymore. She pivoted and departed from the location. As Phil pursued her, I observed. Miranda grinned and replied, I don't want to be photographed, but show me what you'll shoot first. After all, my mark is still on your cheek, isn't it, John? Miranda muttered something, and I unintentionally stroked my cheek. Just like graduation day, it was starting to get a little hot. I would eventually find myself in a natural situation, sitting quietly on my knees in the middle, surrounded by Miranda's father and siblings. I was encircled by the powerful hermits. They were asking questions about me. Can you bring happiness to our daughter, our sister? The level of intensity had surpassed that of their training sessions. I was speaking from the heart. I'll bring her joy. I begged, please give her to me, with unwavering resolve. As I spoke, appraising voices could be heard. Well stated. I felt relieved that I had apparently been welcomed in some way. But hold on. No, really. Miranda snapped to attention. Everybody in the room turned to stare at her, confused. What was the outcome of this 1-hour conversation? Just give it 1 more minute. I would like to spend a little more time with this family. Miranda suddenly understood how much her family loved her when she looked around at the males. I want to be my father's daughter and my brother's sister for a little while longer. Is that incorrect? Her eyes were like small dogs as she begged for just a little bit longer. Refusing was out of the question. You're not attainable. With a sardonic smile, I replied, when you're satisfied, come join my family. The next instant, I found myself flying through the air, approaching a marriage proposal, and finding myself lifted high into the air by the men in the low-ceilinged living room. However, as I saw the men's contented tears stream down their faces, I realized that my decision wasn't at all incorrect. And since Miranda's mark is on my cheek, it won't matter how long it takes. How was that to your liking? Supporting our production will be greatly aided by channel subscriptions. Until the next video, see ya.